Well, good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk to you about leaf miners this morning, in particular leaf mining moths. Um, and because I will sort of briefly mention some of the other species, some of the other insect orders, but yeah, it's mainly moths that are my speciality. So that's what I will be concentrating mainly on. Now, this course came about quite quickly, and it came about following a discussion on Twitter. Why is this not advancing? Right, thank you. In fact, there's every now and then myself or George Dordoff or one of the other sort of active recorders in Glamorgan will post a picture of a leaf mine, and it will get a lot of traction. And so George found this particular small leaf miner on Holmoke in in Barry, and as a result of that, his was only the third Glamorgan record, and several people on Twitter sort of picked up on that and thought, actually, that's a really simple, easy thing to go and find, and they generated quite a lot of records. So that's one reason for doing it. And indeed, so this is Ectodemia herringiella. This is the distribution map for that species. And so my records are here in central Cardiff, and then George found them in Barry. And then there's been a couple of others. So George has also found them out in out towards the East Moors tidal sidings, Pengham Green sort of area. So it's quite an unusual species and not very many records of it. And similarly, so that was back in February. But similarly, within the last sort of couple of weeks, we've been looking at this Stigmella acerus, which is a recent arrival in Glamorgan. It's only been here, I think it was first discovered, was it last year or the year before? But it's not been in Glamorgan particularly long. And so George again posted it on Twitter saying that he'd found it in another 1 kilometer square. It's still expanding, and again, Gareth and a few others got in touch and found it and found more records, and it generally sort of infused people to go out and find more. The thing that sort of didn't irk me, but the thing that I wanted to sort of point out was that to these people on Twitter was that it's fantastic that you're looking at these new things, but it does kind of ignore the ones that have always been present. So Stigmella acerus, this is the distribution map for Stigmella acerus. So it's only really been found in Cardiff so far on Norway maple, but we've already got 32 records for this species, whereas the species that feeds on sycamore, which is Stigmella speciosa, it's more widespread. It's been around since it was first recorded in the county in 1997, but we've only got 42 records. There's only 10 more records of this species that has been in the county for, well, more than 20 years. It's probably always been here. It just wasn't found until 1997 for the first time. But we've already got 32 records of the one that only arrived 2-3 years ago. And it just kind of, as I say, there are many other reasons why Stigmella acerus is easier to spot and things, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But it just shows that if you can infuse people to get out and record them, then you can generate quite a lot of records quite quickly. So that's really where this talk came about. So it was put together in a couple of weeks, and I do know that there was a similar course that was run by Norman Lowe in Powys for BIS, the Biodiversity Information Service for Powys and the Brecon Beacons National Park. And there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but I would nevertheless suggest that it's worth a look of how Norman interprets this subject, and we'll provide you with the link later on. So, an introduction to leaf mines. So I'm going to talk about a few bits and pieces. Firstly, what a leaf mine is, the sort of divisions, what sort of types of mines that we're looking at. But the main sort of focus really that I want to put across is to give you some really easy ones to find, and to get you out and actually put some dots on maps, because that's really what that's all about. That's what it's about for me. Show you some really easy ones and talk a bit about how you go about recording them. Now, there are a few technical terms that I do use, and before I was involved in leaf mining, I'm not a botanist. I'm more of very much an entomologist, but nevertheless, you have to kind of learn a bit of botany. So yeah, I do talk about parenchyma, which is the green stuff within the leaves. The cuticle is the protective outer layer, and probably the thing that won't be a term that you'll have come across if you haven't been involved in leaf mining, or is frass, which is it's the waste product that caterpillars produce. And the way that the frass, the color of it, and the way that it is distributed throughout the mine is quite diagnostic, and really useful to keep in touch with. So those are a couple of slightly technical terms. And I know that I always get people complaining about the fact that I rely on scientific names and I don't use common names. I really don't know the common names for any of these, well, almost any of these moths that I'm going to be talking about. So I will be using scientific names. And I know that people get frustrated and they get scared when they look at these things, but they're not that difficult. I mean, Philonerichta looks like a scary name, but it really sort of rolls off the tongue. Similarly with Ectodemia, it's not actually a difficult name to get to grips with, really. So I would strongly suggest that you don't start learning these newfangled common names for these leaf miners, because I won't know what you're talking about if you start asking me questions about the golden bramble pygmy, I think it's called. I just don't know that. Stigmella aurella is not a difficult name to remember, whereas whatever it was, what did I say it was? Golden bramble pygmy, I think. It's just, yeah, it might be descriptive, but Stigmella aurella is just easier to remember for me. So yeah, I don't make any. Yeah, I'm going to be using scientific names, I'm afraid. You just have to get used to that. And indeed, I will be using scientific names for the plants as well, for quite a few of them. So, because people are used to the scientific names for things like Acer and some of the other plants, Hypericum and things. So yeah, that's just unfortunate, I'm afraid. So what is a leaf mine? Leaf mines are the larval stages of small insects, including moths. There are some beetles, a few sawflies, and true flies, Diptera, that create these mines. What generally happens is the adult moth lays an egg on the surface of the mine, on the surface of the leaf. The caterpillar then hatches out, and it burrows into the leaf, and from there it will live primarily within the leaf, eating out the green stuff, the parenchyma. And as I mentioned before, it's the sort of the shape, the path that the larvae makes as it progresses through its growth stages are the things that make it diagnostic. And you really can do an awful lot of recording without ever seeing the insect at all. Indeed, you can record these even when the caterpillar has left the mine. So this is a nice example where the egg will have been laid. I'm pointing at the wrong screen, aren't I? The egg will have been laid down here at the beginning of this mine, and as the caterpillar has grown, you can see that the mine gets wider. It's filled with the frass. It's carried on down here. Which way has it gone then? Sort of down around here. It gets bigger and bigger until it's sort of getting quite big, and the frass then becomes sort of distributed generally within the center of the mine, and then out here it started, the frass has turned a sort of a nice sort of golden color, and he started sort of spraying it around in these arcs. And this is actually the caterpillar. You can't really make it out very well, but this is the sort of the mouth parts and the head parts, and then the actual caterpillar is in here. Now, as I say, the path that it takes, the color of the frass, the distribution of the frass, these are all important factors when trying to identify these moths. And one of the things that differentiate, it's not that easy necessarily to tell whether it's a fly, whether it's a sawfly or a beetle that's caused this, but you can generally quickly and easily distinguish fly mines from those of moths, because the frass in a fly mine is it's slightly sort of runny, slightly sort of gooey, and it's usually in more than one line. So if it's got two lines of slightly sort of slimy frass in the mine, then that's a fly, and you can probably discount those or go onto the UK fly mines to work out what that is. Sawflies have a similar sort of granular frass to moths, and so do beetles. If the larvae is present in the mine, and actually I'll move on to this one, if the larvae is present in the mine and it's a sawfly, it's not sort of a long narrow shape like this. You get these sort of broad shouldered things, so it looks a bit of a thug, and that's generally a sawfly mine. But often you won't get the mine will not be present, the caterpillar won't be present in the mine, so you then relying on just kind of getting to know what causes these mines and what doesn't. And I think if you saw my intro to identifying micro moths, it's the same sort of idea that you kind of get to know it. Once you know it, then you can know that it's a sawfly, or you know that it's a beetle, and then you can just move on. So there's lots of different types of mine, and it's generally the moths generally mine the blade of a leaf like this. There are other aspects to them. So, for example, this one is a leaf mine. Again, I'm pointing at the wrong screen. This is a leaf mine on in a pine needle. And there are other species that actually mine in the bark of trees. They're probably the sort of the really difficult ones to find. So there's a lot of different sort of types of mine that you can find. And again, and my favorite group probably of leaf miner are the Coleophora, and what you'll find with these is that it'll be a blotch which is a full depth blotch, so it's completely eaten out of all of the parenchyma, it's all gone. And what you'll find is these little circular holes on one of the surface, either above or below, and that's generally the only thing you'll see. And if there's no frass within the mine and there's a little circular hole on one side or the other, then that's been caused by a Coleophora. And if you're really lucky, you'll find a peculiar silken case or a case made out of bits of leaf. They're probably my favorite group of micro moths, but sadly that's not really what most of today is going to be talking about. I could probably do a whole talk just on Coleophora, but that's, yeah, not today, unfortunately. So yeah, so those are the Coleophs, and there are other groups that will also cause a variety of different mines. So this is a really pretty little mine a really pretty little moth that's found on Pelletier of the Wall, and again, it's, yeah, I've forgotten what I was going to say about that. Let's move on. I'll skip that one, sorry, I forgot I added that in. So what makes it a leaf mine and not some other kind of damage? So here is an example. The horse chestnut leaf miner is a well-documented, relatively recent arrival in the UK, and it causes these blotch mines on horse chestnut, and it's not to be confused with the fungus, which causes these sort of brown blotches on the surface of the leaf. Incidentally, the records of the fungus are just as valuable to SEWBReC. So if you do find those, feel free to submit those records as well. But that's not a leaf mine. And how do you know? Well, if you hold the leaf up to the light, you can actually, it's usually it will be translucent if it's a moth, or if it's an insect mine, whereas the fungi will be completely opaque. And indeed, other sort of the leaves can get damaged by all sorts of things. So any mark on a leaf isn't necessarily a mine. But if you hold it up to the light and you can see light coming through, maybe you're lucky and you can see a larvae, or you can see the frass within there, or a cocoon or something. Then you can tell that's actually a leaf mine and not some other kind of leaf damage. So these are the families of the British Lepidoptera as they currently are. So there's 72 families, and of those there are about 15 families that contain some species that leaf mine. The ones that are marked in yellow are the ones that are predominantly leaf miners of some form. The ones in blue contain some of the species within that family are leaf miners, and others feed externally or do other bits and pieces. So, and there are around about 400 leaf mining moth species in the UK, which is about 16% of the British fauna. So there's quite a lot of species out there to be recording. I'm only really going to talk about the two families, the Nepticulates and the Gracilarids, because those are the ones that are probably they're the most diverse, and they're the easiest ones to get to grips with, really. So you can think of mines in kind of four main groups. Firstly, the ones that don't change the shape of the leaf, and within those there are galleries and blotches, and I'll explain what those mean in a moment. And then there are the ones that do change the shape of the leaf, and that's done usually with silk to cause blisters, or to wrap a leaf round into a fold. And again, I'll demonstrate what that means in a sec. So firstly, there's the gallery mines, and so these are, as you might expect, a long meandering gallery. It's linear in some respects. It's not necessarily a straight line, but it is a line where the caterpillar is just wandering around, eating out the leaf, and then eventually it will just leave, and it might double back on itself, as with the Stigmatilia that we saw earlier. It might double back on itself. It might look almost like a blotch, but it is generally just a gallery. And one of the useful things to bear in mind, if you've got a gallery mine, let's go back. So this is Lionetia clarkella, which is quite a ubiquitous species, and I'll talk a bit more about it later on. But this family, it does not, you can't find the egg, you can't see the egg on this mine, whereas with the Stigmellas and the Nepticulates, they do lay, you can see the egg at the base of the mine. So it's here, this is where the egg is, and with a hand lens you can see a very small sort of domed, usually slightly sort of shiny black or silver egg. Or in fact, it's not actually the egg you can see, it's kind of like a protective shell that covers the egg. And it's not a great photo, but it's the best I could do with my microscope. But this is the sort of the thing that you could see here is where the egg is hidden. Okay, and so if you can see the egg at the start of the mine, then you know you've got one of the nepticulids, either a stigmella or an ectodemia, and the surface on which that egg is laid can actually be diagnostic. So some species will only ever lay the egg on the underside of the leaf. Sometimes they'll only lay it on the upper side of the leaf. Whether they lay it next to a vein or in the middle of the plane of the leaf, all diagnostic features. And you can see these with a decent hand lens. ×10 hand lens is good enough. I was pointing at the wrong screen again, wasn't I? I do apologize for that. It's the trouble with using presenter view. So yeah, this is the start of the mine. This is where the egg is placed, and you can just about make it out there. And this is it under a microscope, so you can see, as I say, it's not terribly clear. This particular example of a hawthorn leaf, yeah, didn't give me enough a clear image, but yeah, so hopefully you can see that. Blotch mines, so rather than meandering in a straight line, here the caterpillar has literally just started in a place and sort of swept round in sort of in circles and created a mine with no clear internal structure. This sort of dark mass is where all the frass is. So the fact that all of the frass for this species is in one place is, again, it's diagnostic for this species, which is and this is on birch, which I'm not really going to talk about. So yeah, that's a blotch. It's a fairly yeah, it's not something you're really going to get confused about between a gallery and a blotch, except sometimes they start off as a gallery and turn into a blotch. So this is what we talk about as the tadpole mine, which you find on blackthorn, on Prunus spinosa. And this is the mine of Stigmella plagicolella, a really easy one to find. Yeah, it's a really distinctive, obvious mine. Nothing else will do anything like this, where you have this tapering, short, narrow tapering mine, and then opens out into this big blotch, usually heading out towards the edge of the leaf. Very distinctive, very easy to record. So those are the ones that don't change the shape of the leaf. And this is where I slightly differ from Norman's definitions of things. He refers to these still as blotch mines. I prefer to call them blister mines because they are changing the shape of the leaf. So what happens generally with these species is that they start off, they cut away the cuticle away from the parenchyma, and they'll spin silk across the layer, and as the silk contracts, the leaf shape will sort of fold one way or the other, depending on which side of the leaf they've mined. So here we have two upper side mines. This one is, I forgot to label these, didn't I? So this one is Phyllonerichta corellii on Hazel, and this is a thing called Phyllonerichta stetonensis, which is on alder. And here you can see, so this is the upper surface of the leaf, and you can see this crease down the middle of the mine, and that's, yeah. So and the creases, the folds, can be quite important in identifying these things. So those are upper side mines, and this is an underside mine on hawthorn. And again, you can see that it's done the same thing, only this time it's cut away the lower surface of the lower cuticle, and spun that up. And as the leaf has aged, then as the mine has aged, the leaf has slowly contracted and sort of rolled around it and caused this neat little blister mine at the end of the mine. And what the caterpillar is then doing is it's then feeding on the upper surface of the parenchyma, and you'll get these sort of brown blotches and green bits, and all really useful ways of distinguishing the species. So this is Phyllonecta oxycanthae on hawthorn, a species that I don't really talk about again, so I should have labelled those. Apologies for that. Oh, and yeah, so these are more examples of Phyllonecta oxycanthae. So in fact, those are the same ones, just with the full thing. But this is often what you'll see on a young mine. You'll just see this sort of slightly blistered. The parenchyma has been eaten away, and you can see a sort of a bit of it there. The other thing that some of these leaf miners will do is create folds. So here we have a leaf mine. In fact, I'll go on to the next one because I can see that I've yeah, so here is the sort of starting mine. This is Pyronyx devoniella. The name is a bit towards the bottom of the screen, which I hadn't realized when I put this together. But yeah, so this is Pyronyx devoniella. It's actually started out in this blotch here and created this underside. So this is on Hazel. The literature refers to this as a subrectangular blotch, which kind of means almost square, I guess. And it's got a brown upper surface, which is distinctive compared to the other species that feed on Hazel. So it started out in this, and then it's moved to the outer edge of the leaf, and it will make a succession of folds. So that's probably the smaller of the folds. It's then gone on to this one, and then it's gone on to create these sort of slightly bigger folds. And the neatness of the way that the leaf has been folded over is actually useful to diagnose it as the Pyronyx, and not, because some of the Phyllonecta corellii mines can look a bit like that, but it's not been properly sealed. So that's a fold. Another fold which is quite easy to record, and again I haven't labelled it, apologies for that. This is Pyronyx anglicella on hawthorn, and it creates these. So it's taken the leaf lobe, and it's literally sort of folded it round into a cone. And there's quite a few species that create these sorts of cones, but this is the only one that you'll find on hawthorn. So that's Pyronyx anglicella. So those are the sorts of the forms that leaf mines can take. But what I really wanted to do, as I mentioned at the beginning, is to give you a few sort of target species, if you like. And this is kind of what I do when I'm going out in the field. If I see, for example, a beech tree, I know that there are 5 species for me to go and try and find. I know that there are 2 stigmellas, Stigmella titirella and Hemargirella. There's 2 blister mines, Phyllonecta mystiangella and Messaniella, and then there's one Pyronyx, one that's going to create a fold. So let me talk you through those 5 species, because this is your homework. This is what you're going out to do afterwards, okay? So Stigmella titirella is probably the commoner of the 2. I certainly find it on more beech trees throughout the year than I do the other species. It's generally a short, compact mine, and it's almost always confined between the leaf veins. The egg will have been laid next to a vein, and the caterpillar, as I say, will very rarely cross a vein. So you'll see these quite sort of neat little mines where it's, when it hits the vein, it will continue in a straight line, and then once it gets bored of that for whatever reason, it will turn off. Very neat and quite common. Stigmella Hemargirella, on the other hand, it's generally a sort of a bigger, broader mine. The egg is seldom, if ever, laid adjacent to a vein. It's almost always sort of somewhere in the middle of between the veins, and it's a big meandering mine, and it doesn't really care so much about veins. I mean, this one hasn't crossed the vein very much, but it has crossed the vein in quite a big way. So those are the two. If you find as I say, if you find only one mine that has crossed the vein and it's not a very big mine, then the chances are it is still Stigmella titirella. So it's worth having a good look around until you can find a couple that really do strongly resemble what Hamargyrella should look like before actually recording it. But as I say, the location of the egg is probably the most important feature of determining the two species. And this is the distribution, by the way, of Stigmella titirella. So titirella is generally widely recorded, generally reasonably common, but I think that it should be found. It is probably present wherever there is beech. So there's quite a few squares here to be filled in. And similarly, Hamargyrella, I don't find it as commonly as I do Stigmella titirella, so it probably is slightly scarcer, but I still think that it should be a lot more widespread than these records suggest. So definitely worth getting out to try and find some more. For the two Phalaenopterus, I don't have a great photo of Messaniella, and indeed the only one I could find is on holm oak. So that's so it's a species that isn't just restricted to beech, but you can just about make out, hopefully, that there is a mine here. Okay, the discoloration of the leaf has actually gone beyond where the mine is, but this sort of ridge here is where this short sort of slightly sort of oval mine is, and as I say, it feeds on holm oak as well as other oaks and on beech. Whereas my Stingella creates this quite long mine. It's much more folded, much more tubular, longer, and actually really quite distinctive. And it only feeds on beech, and it's reasonably easy to find. That said, again, it's reasonably well distributed throughout Glamorgan, but I do think that there's room for more records, I think. Whereas Messaniella is the commoner of the two, and you'd expect that because it doesn't just rely on beech as its food plant. You will find it on other species, but nevertheless, I think again there's room for improvement. Particularly, I mean, there must be records within across the Vale. I know it's a bit of a sort of an agricultural wasteland in places, but there's going to be plenty of beech hidden around, and there'll be holm oak along the coast that it'll be on. And similarly on Gower, I'm surprised that there aren't more records on Gower. The other species which you find on beech, which actually you don't find very often in Glamorgan, is the Pyrornyx, and again, it's a very neatly folded leaf. There is nothing else that will create these neat folds, but it does start out as a blister mine. So in the same way that I demonstrated earlier with the Pyrornyx on Hazel, it starts out with a short blister mine, but the upper surface of the mine turns brown, so you can usually tell straight away that it's not one of the Phalaenopterus. And then it doesn't spend that long in that mine, and then if you find a fold next to it, then you know that you've got the Pyrornyx. And as I say, that's actually quite unusual in a Glamorgan context. I've only found it in Cardiff. I've not found it elsewhere. There are a few records from the Hlymphe Valley and a couple of records elsewhere in Glamorgan. So it's actually quite uncommon, But again, whether that's just because it's under-recorded and it's not been found, I don't know. But it's certainly one that I don't come across very often. So I think it genuinely is quite unusual for Glamorgan. But the other mine that you will find on Beech is this. It's kind of like a tadpole mine, but on Beech, and this is caused by the Beetle or Chestis fagi. And again, these are pretty poorly recorded. So if you do come across them, it's well worth entering the record, because yeah, we don't have that many records of them. Very distinctive, very similar to, as I say, some of the other. So it starts off as a gallery, heads down, and the egg is usually laid on the midrib, and then it heads down towards the edge of the leaf and creates this this blotch. The other plant, the other tree, shrub that when I'm out and about, I spend a little bit of time quickly working through is Hazel. Again, there are just the 5 species to concern yourself with, so it's an easy one to just sort of go and tick off the species. And although the 2 galleries are a little bit complicated, the other 3 species are actually really easy to record, and these are the ones that I would certainly recommend you just going out and finding, because you will find them. So Phylloricta corellii it's the one that I showed you at the beginning. So it starts off with these really obvious sort of blotches where the caterpillar has cut away the cuticle away from the parenchyma, and they really sort of stand out on the leaf. You can actually see these as you're driving past trees. They're really easy to spot. And then as the mine gets older, it slowly sort of puckers the leaf over and sort of folds it until you get this sort of brown staining on the parenchyma. You can see the way that this leaf is sort of folded over is the sort of the word of caution towards about the poronex, because sometimes it can look a bit like a fold because of the positioning of the mine, but nevertheless, but the leaf hasn't actually been stuck down, so that's how you can tell that it is the Phylloricta and not the poronex that's done this. So Phylloricta corellii is probably the commonest of the hazel Phyllorictas, because and it's the best recorded of them because it's so obvious and really easy to record. Nichellii, on the other hand, is a little bit harder to spot because it's mining the underside of the leaf, and you get these sort of long tubular mine. So the mine sort of starts probably about here, and yeah, it's a long mine. There's a bit of green left in it, which helps you distinguish it from the poronex, which, as I said earlier, creates these sort of short subrectangular blotches on the upper surface with the brown upper surface. But so if it's still got green on it and it's a long and tubular mine, then that's Phylloricta nichellii, and that's yeah, reasonably common, but not particularly well recorded. The 2 stigmellas, these are actually a bit funky, and I probably wouldn't say that you should go out and do these straight away today, this afternoon, because not least because when I was double checking my presentation this morning, I realized that I'd actually recorded these the wrong way around. So they'll still catch you out. So if you look at the sort of the early literature, they all talk about the early mines being sort of completely filled in one species, and whereas in the other species you get clear margins, and you can kind of see that there is a margin for most of this Microtheronella mine, whereas here on this one, on the Flosslactella, it's not quite so clear, but it's a bit sort of, it's not always that clear cut. and indeed the clearest way of distinguishing the two species is actually where the egg is laid. So on the one on the left, the egg has been laid on the edge of the leaf, and it's nowhere near a leaf axil, a vein axil. Whereas these, the eggs are sort of, there's several of them. There's one sort of going to be around here somewhere. Yeah, so yeah, they're a bit funky, these two, but generally, yeah, but you can record them. And as I say, I've now got to go back and check all of my records because I think I've got them the wrong way around, which is quite frustrating. And they're not particularly well recorded. You can see that there's a sort of a big patch where Microtheronella, this is the Liffey Valley, and this is Paul Parsons and Martin Natuek, who have gone around and recorded lots of stuff, and similarly around Cardiff. But there must be, these species must be present throughout the rest of this, because there's hazel everywhere. There should be this species everywhere. And similarly with Flosslactella, it seems to be less abundant. But I'm sure that's just under recording. Phyllonectra corellii is the one that most people record. It's, as I said before, it's the obvious one. It's the one you can see if you're driving past. Whereas Nichelii is not as easy to spot, but I reckon it's just as common. It's just not as well recorded. So that's probably more of a target, is to find more records of Phyllonectra nichelii. Good luck with that. The other one, as I say, this is the fold, and I've already shown you this slide. So this is Phyllonectra devoniella again. And so you can see that that leaf has actually been properly glued down rather than just accidentally sort of folded over by Phyllonectra corellii. And it starts off with this subrectangular brownish blotch. So if you find that and then find a couple of leaf a folded edge of a leaf, then yeah, it's definitely Pyrornyx devoniella, and it's pretty common. It's reasonably common. I'm surprised that the Liffey Valley guys haven't found more of them in their sort of patch in Bridgend, but it's reasonably abundant wherever I look. Generally, you can usually find it. So that's one definitely I reckon you can go out and find. You have to go reasonably soon because obviously the leaves are falling off of Hazel. So the sooner you get out and do those, the better. The final sort of group of plants that I'm going to talk about specifically are the aces, and because this is where sort of the idea for this this session came from, and it is quite interesting that of each of we think of the three main aces in Glamorgan. So I'm talking sycamore, Norway maple, and field maple. Okay, and you tend to get a species that occupies this that particular niche on one of those species, and so each species will have one species. Each species of tree will have one species of moth that feeds on that particular part of that particular tree. So, for example, the galleries, the two gallery mines, okay, Acerus will go on either field maple or Norway maple, but Speciosa will only feed on sycamore. Similarly, the blister mines, there is, although there are potentially Jonesii records on field maple that haven't been confirmed, generally speaking, if it's on sycamore, it's Geniculea. If it's on Norway maple, it's Johannsii. I'm pointing at the wrong screen. And if it's on field maple, then it's Acerifoliella. There are folds on the corners of leaves, and I was quite happily going to tell you about those until I found out that there's a couple of new species that have just made it considerably more complicated. So I'm going to ignore those for this afternoon, for this session. And then you also get the, oh, I haven't, damn and blast. Yeah, I'll come back to that. Sorry. So yeah, there are 3 different species that feed on the Samara of Norway maple, field maple, and sycamore, but I've clearly messed up on that particular slide. So we'll talk about those in a bit. Don't worry about that. We'll come on to that. Dear. Right. So the two stigmellas. Stigmella acerus is, as I said earlier on, it's only recently arrived in Glamorgan, and it's being recorded at quite a rate, mainly because it's remarkably easy to find on Norway maple. They really stand out as mines. So when the leaves fall and you've got these, the leaves turn yellow, and the same with field maple as well, that you can see the dark brown tracks of these old mines really clearly. They really stand out. Whereas the poor sycamore feeder, Stigmella speciosa, is actually remarkably difficult to find. The leaves of sycamore go brown, the mine is brown, they don't stand out at all. And indeed, you're better off looking for them when the leaves are fully on the tree. So it's getting a bit late for you to be looking for this one now. And I've spent ages staring at sycamore trees, not finding very many of these. Hence, there are only 40 odd records in Glamorgan, whereas Stigmella acerus, you can, if it's in the area, you can find it pretty quickly. So yeah, so there are other reasons why people are finding Stigmella acerus quite commonly around, other than and more so than speciosa, but yeah, it's still slightly disappointing that there aren't more records of speciosa. There are the 2 blister mines. Again, these are the one on Norway maple, Jonesii, or Jonesii, sorry, is quite distinctive. There isn't anything else that does this, so it's an underside mine. So here you can see it's the underside that's been cut away, and this is the upper side of the mine, where you can see that it started feeding on the parenchyma on the outside and left this sort of bit in the middle for it to feed on. And the other species, the sycamore one, is quite similar. I haven't got photos of that, unfortunately. So Geniculea is a very similar looking mine, but on sycamore. So again, at this time of year, it's going to be a bit tricky to find the one on sycamore because the leaves go brown and nasty, but you'll still find them on the Norway maple quite readily. And the distribution is quite interesting, actually, because you can see the distribution of around Cardiff is not that dissimilar to the Stigmella acerus. So it's still around here, but these are obviously, it hasn't actually been found that many places outside of Cardiff, and that surprised me. Although I know that the photos that I've just showed you, so these photos were actually taken just outside Talbot Green. So so there is a spot in here that isn't on my map yet. So I do think that wherever you find Norway maple, it tends to be planted. I think you will probably find this moth. So yeah, that's definitely one that you can look out for. Whereas this is the Stigmella geniculata, which is the sycamore feeder, and you can see it is reasonably well distributed. It's going to be reasonably common wherever sycamore is found, to be perfectly honest, but they do take a little bit more finding, and you're probably not going to find it at this time of year. You probably need to look for it in the summer. So these are the mines on the Samara, on the seeds that I mislabeled in my previous slide. So Norway maple, it's a big seed, and it's got a really obvious and easy mine. So the egg is laid, actually, which way around is it? Sorry, the egg is laid somewhere on the wing, and with a hand lens you can see it reasonably obviously, and then the caterpillar sort of moves towards the seed and then feeds inside the seed. Similarly, this is on field maple, this is Ectodemia louisiella, egg laid down here, heads this way and then into the seed and then feeds in here. And these two are reasonably easy to find. They're really reasonably obvious, distinctive, and whilst the seeds stay green, you can see these tracks quite clearly. The one on sycamore is a real bugger to find. I've never actually found this, despite the fact that I've looked on quite a lot of sycamores. So here is the egg. You can see the egg, and it's done pretty much the same thing. I don't know whether it's just because sycamores turn brown quicker, so it conceals these conceals the mines. There's some talk that it might be that they only really feed on the seeds that are towards the top of the tree, and therefore they're quite hard to find for that reason. But yeah, there are very, very few records of Ectodemia decentella, despite the fact that sycamore is abundant across the county. So that's those three. Now, we mentioned at the beginning, when I was talking about galleries, that Lineacia clarkella is probably the leaf mine that you really, really, really need to get to know if you are going to get into leaf mining, because you will come across it. It feeds on so many different trees and shrubs that it kind of, yeah, if you find a long meandering mine that doesn't conform to any of the things in the book, then it's probably clarkella. It'll feed on pretty much any rosaceous tree, so you can find it on various prunus, various cherries. You'll find it on birch, you'll find it on hawthorn, you'll find it on apple. It does have a common name of the apple leaf miner, but that's a nonsense name because it feeds on everything. It doesn't feed on just apples. It doesn't have you can't find the egg. You won't see the egg at the beginning of the mine, which I think the beginning of the mine, the beginning of one of the mines is here. There's the beginning of the mine is the other mine is over here somewhere. And the other thing that distinguishes, so it's a long and meandering. It rarely pays any heed to any veins. Yeah, and it's quite a big mine. The other thing is that it's got quite a big exit hole. So from where the mine ends to where the frass ends is what we call the exit hole, and that's quite long. That's quite long compared to the stigmellas and the other nepticulates. And the reason for that is it's got a longer caterpillar. So this is the caterpillar, and it's a different shape as well to the ones that you get on to the nepticulates. It's got this sort of almost sort of bulbous kind of look. So yeah, very long larvae, very meandering. The thing that really sort of makes these quite funky is that they actually pupate in hammocks on the bottom of the leaf. And so if you find these on your apple tree, then you should find these fabulous hammocks underneath them. So that's probably not a species for this time of year, because again, it's feeding on things like apple and stuff whose leaves are beginning to go, but you will almost certainly still find them if there are still leaves present. And it's a remarkably common species, and it ought to be found in every 1 kilometre square, I reckon, pretty much wherever there's any kind of tree that is suitable, and there are many trees that are suitable for this species, you will almost certainly find it. My office was down here in Cardiff, and I lived up here in North Cardiff, and I found it in every 1 kilometre square. These are tetrads, but I found it in every 1 kilometre square between my office and my home. So quite a lot of those records in Cardiff are probably my fault. But it should almost certainly be, I reckon, be found everywhere. And if you can't find it at the moment, I still found mine's last week on an apple nearby. So they are still around, but that's the one definitely to go away, and you will find it. I'm sure of it. It's just everywhere. It's probably in your garden, to be honest, if you've got a shrub or a tree that's suitable. Right. Just briefly to move on to a few of the other species that you can probably find. One of the species that I talked about at the beginning was this Ectodemia heringella, which feeds on holm oak, and it's spreading. It's only been in the county for 5 or 6 years, not longer than that, and it forms little colonies. So on any one leaf, you're likely to find several individual mines, up to potentially up to a dozen mines on a single leaf. And this is one that you can still find at this time of year, because the whole point of evergreen oak is that it's evergreen and the leaves will still be there. So that's one to look for, because it's, as I say, it's still relatively new to the county, and although we know it's been found in sort of Barry and Penarth and Cardiff, it's almost certainly going to have reached a little bit further than that. But that's the sort of the newcomer. The one that's been around for longer is Stigmella subrivora, and this is where it can get a bit sort of tricky, because until you sort of pick off the leaf and look at it, hold it up to the light, you can't necessarily tell that that's actually a leaf mine and not just sort of damage the leaf, because holm oak will get quite a lot of these sort of pale, particularly around the edges of the leaf. You'll get these sort of pale damaged areas that can look a bit like mines. But if you hold it up to the light, if you look at it closely, you'll see that there's frass in there. There's an egg down here at the base, and there's actually an exit hole you can just about make out there where the caterpillar is left. It's not super abundant, but it's probably on many of the old planted holm oaks in your city centres. Certainly I found it in central Cardiff, central Newport, and I can't remember whether I found it in central Swansea, but where you've got big mature trees in parkland, you're likely to find it. Probably where it's encroaching on the sort of the coast, you might not find it so much. But yeah, in the parkland, I reckon it's almost certainly present. Another one to look for, it's not a great photo, I apologize for that, is this is Ectodemia septembrella, which feeds on pretty much any of the Hypericum species, so any of the St. John's worts. It's a gallery mine leading to a blotch, and it's really, really distinctive, and you can find it probably throughout the winter on some of the, you find it on the big ornamental Hypericums, the Rose of Sharon, and so if you've got any of those in your garden, there's a good chance you'll find this leaf mine, and it's really, really distinctive, really obvious, and really easy to find. The other thing that I've not really, I've ignored several species of tree today, and I'm drawing to a close now. But the reason that I've ignored many species of tree like oak and birch are that they're quite tricky. There's a lot of difficult species. However, particularly on oak, you'll find over the next month or so, as the leaves drop, you will still find the mines, because they create these fabulous green islands. So what's happening here is that the caterpillar has prevented the leaf from withdrawing all of its nutrients, so that the caterpillar can have somewhere that it can continue to feed throughout the next few weeks whilst it completes its development as a caterpillar. And so the leaves on the ground will be predominantly brown, or whatever color the leaf should be, but you'll see these green patches, these green islands. And if you see any green island, you can be certain that there is at least the beginning of a mine, even if it was aborted. So the caterpillar so the egg was laid down, right at the base of the mine. Usually, so it's usually these species that lay their eggs near the veins that you'll find these green islands in, and then you can rear them out if you want, try and work out what they actually are. And there's a lot of oak species that do this, and a few others. This is Titirella though on Beech, which has done it. So yeah, you can keep leaf mining even when there are no leaves on the trees. That's the take-home point there. So I'm drawing to a close. I've given you whatever, I'm not sure how many I've given you, about a dozen species to go out and find, but there is a lot of really good information out there to help you find, to work out what species you've got on other trees and shrubs, because there are leaf miners on a wide variety of things. And this website is probably your most, this is your go-to in terms of where to go to find information. And we'll provide you with a link. I think Elaine was going to put it in the chat so that you don't have to try and copy it down now. So from here you can go to, if you know what the species is, you can check the species. There's a link there which will take you to, and you can see the examples for the leaf mine for that particular species. If you only know the plant, if you follow that link, it will take you to a page where you can find out what species could be found on that plant, and that's really useful. So if you know you've got a hornbeam, for example, you can't remember what the species are on hornbeam, follow that link and it will help talk you through the various options, and then you can see how different they look. And they've also got some online keys, which aren't completely exhaustive, but nevertheless a useful sort of place to start. If you do go, I do recommend that you go and have a look at Norman's training course that was produced by, which BIS did. And if you do, and again, I think Elaine was going to provide us with the link for that, because it's actually not that easy to find on the BIS YouTube channel. But if you see that, Norman mentions that he's got a field key that he goes out into the field with a piece of paper, writes on it the grid reference, the date and the site name, and then he uses it as sort of like a checklist. And many years ago I took a copy of what he used. His is adapted specifically for Brecknock VC42, and he sadly doesn't get as many species as we do down here in Glamorgan. So when I adapted it for my own purposes, I had to sort of fill it out a bit longer and make it a bit bigger and a bit more complicated. So I've produced my own version, and I'm quite happy to share that with people. I was hoping to get it onto the Glamorgan Moth Group website, but unfortunately the functionality isn't there that I thought was. So yeah, again, don't worry about sort of scribbling down the detail on here, because this is a 3-page Word document that we can provide you with later on. So yeah, but yes, do check out Norman's YouTube, Norman's training session, which is on the BIS YouTube channel. It covers more or less the same sort of stuff that I've done, but he does go into a bit more about sort of breeding things through and other stuff. So well worth a look. But yeah, so really what I wanted to get across is that there are many species of leaf miners that are particularly easy to record, even for the beginner. You only have to recognize a couple of plant species, and you can record a dozen moths without any real difficulty. And just remember, so There are 5 species on Hazel. There are 5 species on Beech. Go out and find them. Right, so that's me done. So I end the screen share. And we can go on to questions.
Thanks, Dave. I haven't had any questions through on the chat, but feel free to type them in now, or if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask anything. I'll just kick off and say, is it worth looking at... So when I'm looking for a leaf mine, is it worth looking for at the fallen leaves on the floor, aside from the green island ones, or is it like once it's gone down, it's too late?
No, not at all. Particularly because you'll still see the Acer ones are really obvious on fallen leaves, and indeed I've spent quite a lot of time recently staring at the ground, looking around Norway maples, hoping that the Stigma acerus has made it all the way out to Talbot Green, but it hasn't yet, as far as I can tell. I'm sure it won't be long. So it's more a question of whether or not there's anything obvious to look for. So if the leaves are brown and there's no sign of green, then looking for leaf mines on fallen leaves is going to be quite tricky. If the leaf is a nice bright yellow color or a bright red color, then there's a good chance that a mine would stand out. And obviously the green islands are that's the sort of the standard thing to be looking for on the ground. But there are still leaves on the trees at the moment, and you've probably got another week or so before, a couple of weeks before the majority of leaves will have gone. So you've got a little bit of time on the deciduous trees before leaf mining is just restricted to the evergreens and the handful of green islands. I didn't mention, for example, bramble. Stigmella aurella mines will be visible on bramble throughout the year, and similarly, there's what I like to call as an estuary mine, which sort of starts out narrow and sort of slowly broadens as it reaches the edge of the leaf, which is a thing called Coptotrichia marginea, which is a really easy one to record at any time of year. I haven't found it around Talbot Green yet, and I don't know why, but maybe it's not up. Maybe it's not up here. I can't believe it's not up here.
Is that on bramble as well?
And that's a really obvious one on bramble. Because I did think that if we were going to do a species of the month, that would probably be a good example, because bramble stays green.
Cool. Okay. Paul Sedgman's asked about sending the links and documents. Yeah, we will. Once we've got this up on YouTube, I'll send an email to everybody who registered. So we'll include Dave's key and the other links you've talked about. Paul also says, I do record leaf mines and have more photos. Oh wait, sorry, that wasn't a question. Other than for damaging recent invasive species, what is the value of these records? Quite often, wherever the tree name is, you'll find the leaf miner. They're not protected species and they won't stop any development. So I guess, what's the point in recording them?
Well, that's true of what's the point of recording full stop, surely. I find it interesting. I think particularly with the new ones, it's interesting to watch them spread across the county. But equally, just because it's common doesn't mean to say that it will always be common, and it might indicate some underlying problem with other things. And we just don't really know. And I think
it's a philosophical question.
It is it's a bit, yeah.
Recording is often, when you look at maps, they're often a reflection of record effort rather than species presence. But the more people that are recording, the more things, then the less bias there is in the maps, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, when I started out looking at and I remember, I think it might have been Paul that suggested that my efforts at recording Lionetia clarkella in Cardiff were possibly, I I can't remember what the word was, but unnecessary maybe. And I apologise, Paul, if that wasn't you, but I do recall someone saying that my efforts were probably somewhat pointless. But my reasoning for doing it was that we know it's common, it should be everywhere. So until we've got a record in every square, we can only say that it's under recorded. Whereas if people have gone out and recorded it everywhere, we then know, actually, no, he's right, it is everywhere. And in fact, it might highlight places where it isn't. I mean, it might be that it genuinely isn't in the sort of the uplands or in the large conifer plantations in the sort of the top of Neath Talbot and that sort of area. It may genuinely not be there, but until people have gone out and looked for it, we don't know. So all we know at the moment is that leaf mines are under recorded.
I remember the Mammal Society said they weren't willing to do an atlas until there was a mole record in every 1 kilometre square in the UK. So, when we've captured this information about common species, it should show the really rare ones.
Yeah, and that was the same idea that we had with the moths of Glamorgan.
Still for sale.
Still available. Everybody wants it. Until we had we needed to get 100. The 100 most common species in every 10 kilometre square, and then we felt that work had been done. Now you can do that with the leaf mines if you haven't got Phyllonecta corellii and Lionetia clarkella. Maybe you haven't got Hazel in that 1 kilometre square, but if you've got Hazel, then you should almost certainly have Phyllonecta corellii. I don't know. Is there a value to it? Yeah,
it's fun.
It's fun. It's obsessive behaviour of recorders. That's what we do.
Right. Moving on. Matt says there's no Beech or Hazel on Flatholm. Are there any other easy ones on Elder to look out for?
Elder's a rubbish plant, I'm afraid. Sorry, no, there's nothing on Elder. I do remember when going to Flatholm, being disappointed by the number of deciduous trees and thinking that I can't think of any leaf mines that you might have. Is there any Hypericum? Is there any St. John's wort on there? Yeah, otherwise you're probably going to be stuck looking for the things that feed on the grasses. So the Elachistids, there's a few species like that feed on grasses. But they're tough, which is why I didn't mention them today. There's a few Coleophora that you might look for, again, on things like the rushes, not technically leaf mining, but they'll be looking at feeding on the seeds. Any salix? Any salix hidden on?
Matt said they've got oak, hawthorn, blackthorn, and barberry.
Yeah, so blackthorn, you'll definitely have Stigmella plagicolella on there. I've no doubt about that. Also worth looking out for the Stigmella prunatorum, I think it's called, which is a gallery mine on on blackthorn, which is probably a coastal species in the UK, and therefore, if anyone's going to have it, it's going to be on Flatholm. I can't remember. Have we had it on the Vale Coast? Can't remember. I've got a feeling there might be a Vale Glamorgan coast record for that species, and if so, I'm sure you've got it on Flatholm. Oak, yeah, there's loads of species on oak. Good luck. They're tricky. Hawthorn, there's quite a few, and actually, the hawthorn is quite a nice one, particularly if you catch the larvae still in the mine, because they're quite tricky if the larvae isn't there. But things like the Stigmella oxycanthella, I think it's called, has a bright green larvae and brown frass, and it's really, really obvious if you see it in the mine. Things like the Ectodemia atricollis have got sort of grubby yellow larvae with brown heads, and so there's quite a few sort of things like that you can tell if you get them. But you've got to remember these caterpillars don't actually stay in the leaf for very long, so you've probably got to look at the leaves regularly. They might only take a week to go from egg to fully grown and gone, so get out, look at them regularly, and see if you can find them. But yeah, hawthorn's quite a good one, actually. There's quite a few species that you can find on hawthorn.
Cool. David and Maddie asks, how do the larvae make the tree hold the nutrients in the green islands?
Good question. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's a chemical release. Well, certainly Norman says it's a chemical that they release to prevent it from happening. I'm quite prepared to take Norman's word for that. I don't actually know, I'm afraid.
Debbie Evans asks if you can recommend any books.
Well, the Moths of Glamorgan, obviously, but that's not really relevant. Yeah, so best book to go for is the Field Guide to the Smaller Moths of Britain and Great Britain and Ireland by Steve Balmer, John Langmaid, and Mark Young. And we'll provide you with the information on that. Basically, this is, there's no pictures, so it's literally, it's kind of the Bible for micro moth recording. All you've got is the life history information. I don't know whether that comes up particularly well. So you look up your moth species, and it will tell you a bit about where it's found, when you can find the mines, and what it feeds on. It's got a really comprehensive index, and that's really the key. So again, if you know the plant, you look up the plant, it will give you the number for so the ID number for each species that feeds on that particular plant. So then you can go through and say, oh well, that feeds on green islands, on oak, usually a larvae around about now, and you can work it out from there. So it's a fantastic resource for all micro moths, not just for leaf miners, and it's the place to start.
My copy turned up yesterday, so I'm looking forward to having a look at it. Joanna Perry asks if there are any species on willow.
Yes. It used to be relatively easy. If it was a smooth leaved willow, then there's the one stigmella, and if it was a rough leaved willow, then it was a different stigmella. They've now decided that the rough leaved one, there's two different species, one of which always lays its egg on one side of the leaf and the other one doesn't care and will lay on either side. It's complicated. And then, but there are some really nice, there's a really easy one. So there's a Caloptilia stigmatella, it forms a cone on willow. So if you look at a willow leaf and it's folded round and created a cone at one end, that's that's Caloptilia stigmatella, and that's a really easy one to record and really straightforward. The Phalaenopteras are a bit tricky. There's several. Yeah, they're quite tricky. You need to rear them out, really.
And there's some information on Norman's video about rearing through, so it's quite a complicated process. I think you have to be quite hardcore to go that extra step.
Yeah, I have tried it, and I've had reasonable success with the Phalaenopteras. No success whatsoever with stigmellas, and that's one of the reasons why I haven't talked about it today, because I'm not a good. I'm not good at that kind of thing.
A bad moth dad.
Stigmellas are quite. Sorry, the Phalaenopteras are quite easy, relatively easy though. You just need to take them off the leaf, put them in a suitable container, cover it in. I mean, Norman uses old tights. I did have some old tights around. I'm not sure that they're in any fit state anymore. And then you need to leave them in the garden over winter, and then bring them in, and then the adults will pop out, and it is quite satisfying. But as I say, I'm not very good at it, so I don't do it very often.
Cool. That's all the questions that I can see on the chat. If anybody has any additional questions, feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we'll call it a day, I think.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
David, thanks very much. Enjoyed it very much. You mentioned a talk that you gave about micro moth identification to family. Could we have a link to that one?
Yeah, it's on the SEWBReC YouTube channel. But yes, Elaine, can you do the honours with that?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I should warn you, it's not a complete comprehensive identification. It's just how you go about, or how you might start to learn the micro moths and sort of the processes that you go through. And yeah, so it gives you a sort of a flavour.
Yeah, well, that's good, because often, I mean, I do look at micro moths, but I often find actually getting the family amazingly can be difficult, and, and it depends on a few things, I think, and I can often get those wrong. So I'm very interested to look at what you've got to say.
Yeah, hopefully that'll help.
Yes. So I've put that in the chat now. I'll send the email link up by email as well.
Thank you very much.
Any more for any more? Lots of people saying they're going to go and start looking for stuff now. So
good. I want
wait
records.
for the records to flood in. Recording wise, do you want to say anything about recording?
Yeah, I mean, I use the apps. I don't tend to go out with my piece of paper anymore. I tend to use either the Lurk Wales app if I'm in Wales, or the iRecord app if I'm in the elsewhere in the UK. And it's a relatively easy way to enter records in the field, and you can get the grid reference where you are, and you can add a photo to it. So but yeah, any record that you submit, either on paper if necessary, but preferably using something electronic. Who you are, where you are, what it is, when it was. Those are the four important things. With leaf mines, if you've got photos, great, and the host plant is also exceptionally useful if you for verifying purposes. But yeah, all usual forms of submitting records are greatly received. And of course, we're probably hardly any of you are from Glamorgan, so quite happily let you pass on the records to other parts of Wales or the UK. And say it's my fault when you identify stuff.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us.